Right, so 2014, I've already written in a lot of this, so you might be able to tell the tension in my voice because YouTube collapsed on me once again and deleted my upload, so I've got to do it all again. So I'm going to talk through the notes I've got. So first up, you can see fairly straightforward these first early questions. So sole proprietor, also known as a sole trader, so don't confuse those, has unlimited liability. So that is our answer there. Don't think that it's a limited company, that's a private limited company which has limited liability. That is not the correct answer. That would be if it was asking about a private limited company. So, and then sole proprietor, again, remember it's a sole trader, same thing. Well, if it's sole, that's one person, so it's one owner. 2 marks. Explain 2 reasons why you would want to be a sole trader. Well, the first thing is that Leroy would have decision making. He is the one owner, therefore he has sole responsibility for decision making, makes it himself. He might be able to use his own market understanding. He doesn't have to run anything past shareholders, stakeholders or anybody else, and it's quite empowering. He gets to make decisions. It's his his business really, so it's an empowering thing. He also, being the one owner, gets all of the profit. He can therefore decide whether he wants to reinvest or go on holiday or buy a house or buy a car. It's for personal use. He could even expand. The issue is, and this is not to do with this question, but if it was to ask you for what the negatives are, is by being a sole proprietor with unlimited liability, he could lose everything. That includes his assets because they're not protected, and therefore the sole trader business, sole proprietor, is a risky version. You should really move to a limited company, and that's less risky. Next up, so we're looking at stakeholders. The 2 I'm going to compare are the manager, that's Leroy, and the employees. The reason that these 2 might come into conflict is because the manager, Leroy, he wants to keep costs down, whereas the employee wants a pay rise. So obviously, if Leroy keeps costs down, he won't be able to give a pay rise. If he does give a pay rise, his cost goes up. So Leroy wants one thing and his employees want another. If it were to ask about other stakeholders, you might mention pressure groups, community engagement. You might look at shareholders if it's an LTD or a PLC, but for this it's not relevant because he is a sole trader. So there's our conflict. One way that we can look at growth, we can look at sales and revenue growth year on year. So from 2014 you compare it to 2015, has it gone up? You can also look at market share, which is a percentage of the market that they provide for. You could look at footfall, how many people are coming into the business. And you can also obviously look at profit, again, year on year, profit in one year compared to the next. And this is all a bit of a mess, but hopefully I'll talk you through it. So why is an organisation structure important? So here we've got an organisation structure, a hierarchy, where you've got the manager at the top and the subordinates underneath. This at the moment has a span of control of 3, 1, 2, 3. So it's important to look at an organisation structure because you'll be able to tell the span of control and therefore who's delegated to. If it's narrow, it'll be 3. If we add 2 more subordinates, it goes to a wide span of control and it's now 5. So the span of control has increased. If the span of control increases, it will mean that decision making is sometimes a bit more complicated. There are more ideas going to the manager, but it can become a little bit more convoluted. Another thing that you could have mentioned that an organisation structure brings is an awareness of the chain of command. So the levels in the hierarchy between the top and the bottom. 1, 2, 3, 4. So there is 4 steps in that hierarchy. The longer the chain of command, the more difficult communication is because the distance between the top and the bottom is so long that sometimes messages can become distorted. Moving on. Again, to a lot of scribbles because I did it sort of live like I've done the other ones, but it deleted it. So honestly, I wanted to smash my iPad up, but I refrained. So Leroy decides that Trendy should grow laterally. What I don't want you to think is that is a new term. We've used the word horizontal. Horizontal integration is the same as lateral integration. And what that means is that as Leroy is a secondary business, because he makes, or no, is he tertiary because he sells? He sells. He's a tertiary business, so he sells fashion. If he was to grow laterally, he would buy another fashion outlet because that's when it's lateral or horizontal. So he's buying into other businesses at the same stage in production. Lateral would be here again, secondary buys a secondary or primary buys a primary. The opposite to that is vertical. So a primary might buy a secondary or a secondary might buy a tertiary. Now that is riskier. But actually, if you can get all of them within one business, you have control of the whole process, and you can therefore then keep all the value added within one business. So if we think of a furniture company, they might own the logging company, they might build the furniture out of the wood, and then they might own the shop where it's sold. So every time value is added, if they own all of them through vertical integration, then they can be potentially more profitable. It's risky because there are different skills needed at each different level, and so you would have to net everything together quite nicely. That's obviously going way above that. That, what I've just explained, will give you an answer to the advantage here. The reason that you do it within one sector is that employees have the same skills and knowledge to be productive in the same area because they know that business inside out. One reason why he's decided to move to an LTD, well, the obvious one is limited liability. Always go for that. And the reason that that's good is that basically the business and the owner have a separate legal identity. So here we've got the sole trader example where the business and the employees exist in the same legal circle. So if they're sued, they're both sued. That's risky, because you don't want to lose your assets. If they move to the limited option, the one that they've just moved to, if the business is sued, you can see that the business exists in a different legal sphere to the employees. So if the business is sued, the business has an issue, but the employees, they're safe. They can keep their assets because they have separated themselves. So this is the better option. Often all it takes is a little bit of paperwork to move from a sole trader to an LTD. Bit of paperwork plus a bit of cost. Right, this is probably the most complicated one, the one that took me ages to explain, so hopefully I get through this before it crashes again. Now, I don't want you to think that this is too complicated. You can see at the bottom that this is a 6-mark question, but actually you can split it into a 3 and a 3. So we've got the business as growing. So let's say it had 3 employees and it's starting to grow to 5 and 6 and 7. Now, as you get more employees, you become more inefficient, and therefore when you are not good as a business, you're not being profitable. What happens is employees' morale drops. You know, you're not working as such a close-knit team of employees, so you start to not be as motivated if you're the bigger the business. So this business, what it's trying to do is think of ways to get people motivated again, increase morale. And there's 2 options they're looking at: fringe benefits and a profit share. So we know that we're going to have to talk about fringe benefits for 3 and a profit share for 3 to give us the 6 if we get it all right. So we could start off with a brief paragraph. I'm going to decide, because it asked me to decide which one to go for. I'm going to go for profit share, because I feel this will increase productivity to a greater degree than fringe benefits. So what do I decide to talk about? Well, first I'm going to look at the negatives, because it says here, in your answer you should explain why you did not choose one of the options. So I'm going to go for fringe benefits and the negatives associated. So first of all, tell me what fringe benefits are. Basically, it's a supplementary or additional bit of capital that is added on to the employee's salary. But it might not be in terms of money. It's often in terms of a car or healthcare or something along those lines. So we've told them what fringe benefits are, but what are the negatives? Well, I feel that if you give somebody a car, that's great in the short term. I think it gets people to work harder to get that car. The reason I don't like it is because I don't feel that it sustains high levels of motivation. Once you've got the car, and after a couple of weeks and you get used to the car, you then go back to your old lazy ways. So I think it's a short-term morale boost, but not a long-term. So let's look at profit share. This is the one I'm supporting. What is it? Right, well, it's an incentive, a direct payment linked to the performance of the business. If the business does well, then the employees do well, because you share a percentage of the profit with each employee. The reason I like this is the opposite of this. I think it works in the short, but more importantly in the long term, because if you continue to work hard as a group, you will get your percentage of the profit. So it never wears off. It also creates great teamwork, because if the business does really well, or the only way a business does really well is when everybody gets together and works really hard. So for people to get a percentage of the profit, everybody pulls together and works as a team and works and communicates, etc. So actually this will make people happier, and happier employees work harder and then are more successful. So that would get us our 6 out of 6. I think that is where the next video starts.